Somewhere Better by I_am_Ellie on AO3. Episode 64. Chapter 15. Learning to Breathe. The dock smelled heavy of salt, and the ocean water that sprayed up made the wood sticky and slippery. The sky was dark with rolling storm clouds, the beginning of a storm just on the edge of reality, and the water was gray and frothy, like molten, churning iron. Izuku wasn't concerned with the water, nor with the worry sky. His eyes were set on the heroes, the water heroes, who were touring them about the docks. The sea rescue heroes, Psyche, and right by him, the water horse duo. There were other minor heroes too, sidekicks and interns, and being around so many new and upcoming pros made Izuku's heart sing. He wrapped himself tighter in his jacket as a particularly large wave of water splashed up onto the deck, soaking everyone. Hitoshi, at his right, gave a choked-up gasp, and Denki, at his left, cheered. The day was great. It was fantastic, even if he had to lie to his uncles to get there, and the stinging of guilt was still there. He had made it. He, Denki, and Hitoshi. Ochako's parents hadn't let her come, and May hadn't really been interested in seeing the heroes in the first place. We're meeting heroes. Real heroes. Isn't this great, Toshi? Izuku asked, as Silky guided them through to another large, steady-looking ship. Hitoshi nodded, smiling that nervous smile he did when he wasn't sure about something. Are you okay? Izuku frowned. Hitoshi nodded. There was a tense set in his shoulders, and a pitch in his brows that made Izuku think that might not be the case. Are you sure? Denki grabbed both of their wrists, then, dragging them along to the front of the group so they could get a better view of the ship, jostling a few students from other classes as they went. This is so cool! Denki gasped and bounced in place. This is so cool! This is what we're gonna do one day. Work by the docks? Well, no, not by the docks. That'll be a really, really bad idea. But work! Hero work! This is hero work! This is so cool, Zuko! Izuku nodded, because Denki was right. This was cool. Your uncles are heroes, right? Do they know Silky and the Water Hose heroes? God, imagine... Their teacher, a few paces away, whirled on them, hushing them sharply. Denki and Izuku smiled at her sheeply, and Hitoshi blushed dark red. Izuku started paying closer attention to Selkie, as well as the large ship behind them. It was a large, metal monstrosity that could probably take a cannonball without receiving any damage. The entire structure was at least as long as the dock itself, and the width was thicker than that of a house. It made Izuku wonder about the inside structure. I wonder if it has cannons. Denki and Izuku thought out loud at the same time. Denki grinned, and Izuku had to stifle a laugh. Their teacher glared at them again, and Hitoshi looked like he wanted to sink through the floor. Now does anyone have any questions? Selkie asked, and Izuku's hand, as well as several others, shot into the air. Psyche laughed, boastedly, before calling on a purple skinny girl with neon green pigtails. How long have you been a hero? She asked. Several other questions went more or less the same way, and Izuku was practically hopping in place in his eagerness for someone to call on him, trying to make up for his disadvantage in height by standing on his tippy toes. Denki started hopping in place as well, pointing at Izuku, though with all the other children gathered in one place as well, Izuku wouldn't have been surprised if he simply didn't see them. Hitoshi looked like he wasn't sure whether to encourage them by helping or to walk away and pretend he didn't know them. Well, that's about all the time we have for questions. Psyche sighed, regretfully, and Izuku and Denki slumped in disappointment. There were several ahs throughout the group, and Psyche nodded in sympathy. I know, but who wants to see the ship? The group jumped as the hero raised his voice, and there were several bolstered cheers and screams from the children, and even some from the teachers and supervising parents. The teachers tried to arrange the students into a neat, single-file line, of which Hitoshi, Denki, and Izuku were placed firmly near the back. Denki and Izuku both rocked back and forth on their heroes, impatiently, as students slowly trickled into the ship, and even Hitoshi looked a bit excited. You three need to behave. A voice from behind them said. Sorry, Mr. Shinsou. Denki and Izuku atoned. Hitoshi hugged the man's leg, and Mr. Shinsou ruffled his son's hair. All right. You boys excited? Izuku and Denki nodded vigorously. You doing okay, Hitoshi? Hitoshi nodded against his leg. Good, I'm glad. Izuku had been a bit worried when he heard Mr. Shinsou would be chaperoning the trip, but he hadn't bothered to question Izuku's participation, and Denki and Hitoshi hadn't said anything to him. Izuku figured so long as he was careful, and Mr. Shinsou never mentioned anything to his Uncle Sashi and Uncle Shouta, he would be fine. He would be fine. Everything would work out the way it was supposed to. He'd been careful. Nothing could go wrong. Not at this point. Maybe that thought, that small attempt to curb the nervousness and the guilt, was what did it. The small glimmer of hope that things would naturally go the way they were supposed to. Perhaps that's what jinxed everything. Izuku didn't know. Neither he or anyone else in the dock expected. He didn't know. Hound Dog had a muzzle on his face, digging into his mouth, and his wild, scraggy hair. He also had what appeared to be a permanent-looking scowl and a suspicious gleam in his eyes. Shouta wasn't sure what to make of him. He couldn't tell if Hound Dog trusted him, and that made it hard for Shouta to trust Hound Dog. This was going to be the longest interaction of his life. Hello, Eraser. His voice was low, growling, and angry, like it was barely being contained. His head jerked to the side this way and that as he leaned back in his chair, and when he wasn't talking, a low, reverberating growl being let loose from his chest. Hello. Shouta returned, trying to sound at least a little pleasant, even if he wanted to run in the other direction. He wasn't sure what was more off-putting, Hound Dog himself, or what this meeting was for. Hound Dog gave a loud yelp, followed by a low growl and an even louder bark. Shouta blinked. I'd expect you already know why you're here. Let's try to... Another loud yelp, followed by an even louder bark. Get this over with as quickly as possible. I know you have class to teach. Yes. Shouta agreed. Hound Dog opened a drawer in his desk and pulled out a little notepad of paper, as well as a silver-lined pen. His head jerked to the side. The growling picked up a bit in pitch. Have you experienced any problems in your mental health? His head jerked to the side again, and the muzzle digging further into his skin. Any episodes of depression, self-hatred, or violent tendencies? Nightmares? Shouta wasn't sure how to answer that. How were people supposed to answer that? He knew he was supposed to be honest, but how was he supposed to say, oh yeah, I have nightmares about being abandoned as a child? How was he supposed to put that into words? Talking was easier with Hizashi. Hizashi usually knew what he was trying to say, even when Shouta himself didn't. That's just who Hizashi was. Hizashi knew him. Hound Dog didn't. Hound Dog barked loudly, head jerking to the side again, a crazed look coming into his eyes, before he was still again. That's fine. I understand how that could be a difficult question. His calm answer completely countered his earlier reaction. How about a written test sheet? That might be easier. The sheet had 20 questions, each one marked with words never, rarely, sometimes, most days, and all the time. All he had to do was read the question and circle the answer that fit best. That he could do. That was easy enough, wasn't it? Some of the questions were difficult to answer, just because Shouta wasn't sure, though he couldn't quite figure out why answering a question about his mental health would be difficult. He was the one who experienced it, wasn't he? Why couldn't he just take the words and use them? Feeling of usefulness or powerlessness was maybe an option, maybe should be an option. He circled sometimes, then erased it and circled it again. Hound Dog fell into a storm of loud barking, which, at that point, Shouta had learned to ignore past the first instinctual flinch. He had a feeling the counselor wasn't going to stop, regardless of what Shouta did or didn't do. Trouble in social situations. That wasn't a difficult one. He was circling all the time before he had the chance to think it over. Social awkwardness and trouble talking to others, in public or private, had been a staple for Shouta's entire life. The entire test took him about 15 minutes to finish, and when he passed it over to Hound Dog, the man nodded in understanding before jotting something down on his notepad and staring at Shouta for a long, quiet moment, still growling faintly. "I'm referring you to a psychologist," Hound Dog finally said, and Shouta jumped. "What?" "No excuses. You have to go," Hound Dog continued, writing something down and peeling the slip off before handing it over. He gave a loud string of barks and yelps before continuing. "I'm not saying you can't work, because I don't think you're a danger to the students, but I am going to tell Nezu that I think you should talk to someone and possibly get diagnosed for several things. And he won't let you do it until you do," he yelped, his head jerking to the side. "Understand?" Shouta nodded. "Tested for what?" Shouta finally asked, head cocked to the side. "I don't understand." "I'm honestly not sure yet. It could be many things," he barked, head jerking again. "The test wasn't for anything specific. Just tell me if was a problem or not, which I think there most certainly is. But I can't legally diagnose someone, which is why I'm referring you to a doctor." Shouta leaned forward, gesturing idly as he spoke. "So, you think I'm a head case?" "That's not how I would phrase it." Yip, bark, jerk. "But essentially, yes." His hands dropped onto his leg with a thump. He tapped his foot nervously, frowning at the ground. "I know more about your history than you probably want me to, because of public records, and things Nezu told me." Of course, Nezu knows something. He gave a growling bark. "So I know that there's some underlying issues, and I know you've been through a lot. And it is, quite literally, my place to judge. It's why we're here." "Yep. I think you need to be tested for post-traumatic, social anxiety, depression, maybe even borderline personality disorder." "You think my personality is disordered?" "I think it's common among trauma victims, which is what you are. I'm trying to cover all my bases so you can get help." He gave a growl, louder than the rest, head jerking to hit the back of his chair. "I'm not your enemy here. I'm trying to do my job. This is part of it. There are things that I think might be wrong, but those are the main ones." "So you want me to visit a shrink? So you can be diagnosed?" "Yes." He ran a hand through his hair with a heavy sigh, mine alternating between worry over what a shrink would tell him and all the future medication bills that were in store. Hound Dog growled. "I know this could be frightening. That's understandable." Hound Dog continued. "It's a little scary situation. But looking to get help isn't a bad thing. It's a part of life. This doesn't have to be something you should be afraid of." He stood up abruptly, chair tipping slightly behind him, and left the room without looking back. All right. He thought he needed help. Fine. Why did his chest feel so tight? There was a staff bathroom right off of Hound Dog's office, and he quickly stepped inside and locked himself in. It was a single bathroom, without stalls, and only one sink, urinal, and toilet. He splashed cold water from the sink onto his face, taking a deep, stuttering breath, before sinking to the floor, just trying to gather his thoughts and remembering to breathe. For a moment, he felt stupid about that too, because who in their right mind forgot how to breathe? Izuku does it all the time. Izuku had also gone through hell. And you haven't? Shut up! The towel was cold, but his face was hot, burning, and so were his eyes, like when he used his quirk. It took him a moment to realize he was crying. Why was he crying? He was a pro hero. A pro hero. He'd gone on real missions before, taken down villains, trained until his hands bleed, and his body was screaming at him to stop before he broke, and he couldn't handle a counselor telling him to go to a doctor? You're an adult. Get your shit together. I'm drowning. He wanted something. He didn't know what. Help? No. Sleep? Anyways, but that didn't seem to be it either. He wanted to do something. He wasn't sure what. There wasn't anything to see. There was nothing. And he wasn't sure how to climb out of whatever pit he was stuck in. Something was holding him down, tying him down. and he couldn't get out. I'm drowning. His shoulders were shaking, stuttering, and he couldn't stop them. But that didn't matter. He imagined Hizashi on one of those nights when he couldn't sleep, or during final exams week at UA, 1,000,000 years ago, when the stress finally caught up and his strength failed, and he fell to pieces. Let it out. It's okay. It's gonna be okay. No, it's okay. Stop it! He couldn't breathe. He needed something. His phone buzzed, a notification going off obnoxiously, and he barely heard it. It took him several tries to open the lock because his hands were shaking so much. Shio, of course. It was a different number than the man usually used. Of course, but he could tell it was him. The message contained a set of coordinates, and right below that, a second message reading, "Come to the agency for a brief meeting. Then head to the coordinates." Come to the agency for a brief meeting. Then head for these coordinates. There's a situation. You'll be briefed upon arrival. Thank God. His phone buzzed again as he was leaving the bathroom. Bring present Mike. Figures. He ran towards the English wing, whipped his eyes as he ran along. He didn't have his uniform, because of course he didn't, but there should be a spare capture weapon in the gym or the lab. He opened the door to Hisashi's classroom quickly, the door hitting the opposite wall with a bang. 22 pairs of eyes turned to glare at him, Hisashi's included, who looked like he was a bit concerned for his mental state. Who isn't today? We've got a situation, Mike. Let's go, he said, already turning to leave. He heard hurried footsteps running to follow him. Show? Hizashi asked, jogging to keep up with his pace. Have you been crying? Are you okay? Did something happen? What's wrong? Nothing. Don't worry about it. We need to hurry down and get suited up at the agency. Shin has some kind of mission for us. Sweetheart, are you sure you're... I'm fine. Let's move. With Hizashi driving, it took a good 20 minutes to reach the hero agency from UA. Even ignoring several traffic laws, by the time they reached the building, several other agencies were waiting outside to usher them in, including Vlad King. Alright, sir. Get changed. We'll be in the conference room 3. Sho demanded, appearing out of nowhere and ushering Hizashi and Vlad onto the elevator. Once Shouta was dressed in his uniform and donned with the capture weapon, it was a short walk towards the conference room 3. Vlad, Hizashi, and 2 other pro heroes Shouta couldn't remember the names of were gathered around the table, and there was a whiteboard with the names of 2 other pros written on red ink, one of which, he noted, was Ingenium. We're making a team for the mission, Sho said, placing back and forth in front of the whiteboard. We've already called in Ingenium, and he'll be here shortly. Shouta nodded, sitting beside Hizashi at the table. We're up against a big villain this time, and the police want this guy in cuffs and off to prison by nightfall, so focus. Shouta looked at Hizashi questioningly. His fiancé grimaced. Muscular, he answered, and Shota's eyes widened. Shit. Muscular had been at the top of the most wanted list for months now, and he was so powerful that all pros in the area had been given the order not to interact without police officers with heavy artillery and the help of a team of other heroes. He'd already killed several other heroes over the past year, most of them small-time underground heroes who hadn't been found until a week later since no one thought to report them missing. If Muscular's involved, we're gonna need a lot more than hope and luck to make it through this time, Shouta thought bitterly. Did we tell Izuku we loved him this morning? Shoji started muttering under his breath and writing something on the board, and Shouta pulled out his phone. Watch me whip. Me. If something happens, Izuku is yours to take care of. Nemuri. What? What's happening? Me. Rough mission. You'll probably hear about it in the news tonight. He turned his phone off and put it away before he could read her text, focusing back on the mission. A team of pros from their agency, as well as Ingenium and several of his sidekicks. Quite a few other heroes might show up as well, if they were in the area, and they would have to cover fire from the police. It still didn't feel like enough. Shoji got a call on his cell phone, and he took out the device with a sigh. What? The man snapped. I see. He ended the call. That was an update from the police. He has hostages, an entire grade of 6-year-olds from the elementary school a few blocks away. Shouta felt the blood drain from his face, and Hizashi looked to be in the same state he was. You don't think... Hizashi whispered, voice trailing off. Izuku's friends are there. Shouta stated faintly. He felt like he was going to throw up. They didn't know enough about the villain to determine whether or not he would kill children, but it didn't seem far from within the realm of reality. Thank God we kept the kid home from the trip, Hizashi murmured. Shouta nodded, taking a deep breath, and trying to release some of the tension from his shoulders. Hizashi grabbed his hand, giving it a reassuring squeeze. We'll get those kids out of there, okay? It'll be okay. Shouta nodded. He didn't want to have to be the one to tell Izuku his best friends were dead. About that. We'll talk about the elephant in the room in a second. I want to talk about how the counseling went. How the meeting went, right? Okay, Hound is always a funny character for me. But, I love how he was not the one who's like, alright, you're diagnosed with this, this, and this, and this. I love that. I read a fanfiction where, like, meeting one, Hound Dog started, diagnosing. I'm sorry, Hound Dog, you're a counselor. You don't diagnose. You don't. Right? I don't even think therapists are allowed to fully diagnose certain things. Right? I think you have to go to a psychologist for that. Therapists can be like, hold up, I think you have this. Let me refer to you to this to have you have, an evaluation. Because they themselves can't do the evaluation. Right? For the most part, from what I understand, they themselves can't do the evaluation. They could tell you, hey, you have symptoms of this. Maybe that's something you want to get evaluated for and help you get the evaluation for that. But they themselves, I do not think, can do the evaluation. There's a vast difference. So I do love that we had that continuity there. It's very interesting that he didn't mention autism, but whatever. Again, met him face to face, first time meeting, it literally understandable. And just because he listed these doesn't mean that the author is saying that these are the ones that he has, but they make sense. Like, he listed post-traumatic, social anxiety, depression, and borderline personality disorder. So, post-traumatic, PTSD. It makes sense. He has a lot of nightmares. We don't really see a lot of, a lot of huge hints towards PTSD, which is why I haven't, gotten towards PTSD and saying that he has it. But it's not out of the realm of reality, right? It's very much, it can be PTSD. He just doesn't have that many, I wouldn't be able to identify what his triggers were based on everything we've seen, right? And for the most part, yeah, it makes sense. It makes sense. Or actually, no, one of his triggers could be the Komodo. That could be one of the triggers, right? I mean, it didn't trigger the way it's, you intentionally think a trigger would go. But again, PTSD, I know a lot of times in main media and in Hollywood, we see it portrayed as a certain way when PTSD can show itself in many different ways, including the fact that PTSD can just be completely absent of, flashbacks. It could just be a trigger happens, you become extremely anxious, nervous, angry, situations, right? So it can very much be PTSD. I guess the only time that I could say where it's like, oh yeah, that's like a heavy sign of PTSD was the kimono incident where Shouta was talking to Izuku about the kimono thing and that exploded kind of thing, which that can also go into borderline personality disorder. Again, a lot of these times that these disorders can bounce off of each other, right? These illnesses, I guess. I don't know, it feels like an icky word, but these things, no, that's even worse, whatever, but these can bounce off of each other, right? The post-traumatic could have started up, and then the borderline really just, it bounced off of each other kind of thing, right? Social anxiety makes sense. I feel like social anxiety, he's not really social. That's where he got it from. I'm pretty sure that's underneath his autism. So his autism is what making him have social anxiety, right? So a lot of the times with like bigger ones like that, sometimes it's like, oh, depression, but then anxiety, blank, 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 blank. And a lot of these smaller ones, or not quote unquote smaller ones, but all of these other ones are caused by this this big one, right? This is the one that's fully plaguing the mind for this person. And these are a result of this main thing. I'm saying main thing because that's the thing that's causing everything else kind of situation, right? That's the center. Not saying that the center is larger or smaller than the cracks. The cracks can be quite longer than and more bigger than the actual center, but that's the center. That's where it started, right? Kind of thing. I like to emphasize that. Someone, I want to emphasize that, right? Depression makes sense. Depression, again, can be underneath autism as well. A lot of the times, autism can also lead towards depression, social anxiety, and stuff like that. And depression can also be underneath borderline personality disorder, BPD, right? Borderline personality disorder, not to be mistaken by bipolar personality disorder or bipolar disorder, right? Bipolar type 1, bipolar type 2. Borderline personality disorder, I guess the best way to, describe it is the instability in moods, behaviors, especially self-images, right? So instability, it's literally what it sounds like. Instability of moods. This could often impact other people's relationships. So like big features, not features, but big things on this is, I guess, as I said, emotional instability, right? Like you could have days where like episodes, not days, episodes that could last up to days, few hours, right? Episodes of anger, depression, anxiety, as I said before, it lasts hours or days, depending on people, right? And then obviously difficulty to control emotions and emotional impulses, right? Like for example, with Shouta, there's moments where he's extremely angry and lashes out and then walks away. And then he thinks, why am I like this? How, kind of thing situation. There could also be, relationship issues, but I don't think even if, he was, even if he does have this, right? I don't think that his instability with relationships is because of that. I feel like his instability with relationships is just his parents are dickheads who left him because he was just a quote unquote a little weird. He's not weird, right? I think the thought of not being quote unquote normal it's insane because normal is a social construct. I'm saying this now. Normal is a social construct. It's a social construct, right? What's normal here is not normal in another place. What's normal in your home isn't normal in other homes. Normal is a social construct, right? It's a social thing. It's a thing that changes. There is no true quote unquote normal. Normalcy is a thing we made up as humans. Normal is not a thing. I mean, it quote unquote is a thing, but it's not. It's a social construct is what I'm saying. There is no true normal, right? There never will be, right? There's no true normal. There's no true normal. But people with borderline personality disorder can also have like a huge fear of abandonment, and a lot of the times they feel it a whole lot more as well, which we could sense that with Aizawa. But again, the abandonment fear may not fall under borderline personality disorder, but might fall under the fact that, he was literally abandoned by everybody in his life except for 2 people. Well, 3 now. Well, if Izuku does live, which I hope he does, he's gonna live. He's gonna live. Also, a distorted self-image, so a bad self-image, thinking that I'm horrible, I'm bad, I'm just, things like that. There's also self-harming behaviors that could be underneath this as well. Not necessarily in, like, actual physical self-harming, but there could also be self-sabotage, stuff like that. It's a lot of things in one. A personality disorder is hard to disdain and talk about because it presents itself differently person by person, right? That's what personality disorders is. They present themselves a tad bit different each time. I mean, all disorders do, even depression, even something as big as anxiety. Not big, but well-known as anxiety and depression. Those are like the most well-known ones. Borderline personality disorder might also be a more well-known one, but the reason why I said it is because it's not as well-known, and some people might still be like, what is that? I don't know what that is. I would sit here and read exactly what it says on the DSM-5, but I not dumbed it down, but I simplified it for you because Let's be honest, the first time I read it, I didn't understand it either. It had big words, and I had to go line by line and decipher what it was really saying, because it's a huge page of text. I think the actual, area for it's like six pages of just explaining it and all its symptoms and stuff like that. And so this is my simplification of it. There was a word for that. It started with an E, I think. Simplification? No, I don't know. But I did that so you could understand it a bit better. But, I could explain the other ones as well. But post-traumatic stress disorder, PTSD, I guess I'll simplify it because I know that one is also one that is kind of well-known, but also not as well-known. But post-traumatic stress disorder, normally this happens when a huge, thing happens to someone, a very severely traumatic event happens, such as like natural disasters, a serious action, a violent thing that happened to the person, even warfare. We see it mostly portrayed with people in the army and stuff like that, people who's been to war. It's common to get it there as well, but it could also be from a car crash. A car crash can anything that's traumatic, a severe traumatic event, right? That your mind dubs a severe traumatic event, right? You can get this, and your brain is quite literally going to make you remember it every time there's a symptom. It has intrusive memories, like recalling things that you don't want to think about, dreams. A lot of the times we get nightmares during this, This could even start affecting you physically, because a lot of the times when the mind is feeling a lot of strong emotions, it sends it to you physically. Think about when you're, what's it called in your stomach that bursts sometimes? That is really dangerous to burst because it could create a lot of infection and stuff. It started with an A. Izuku's burst. Izuku's was, bursting. That can, a lot of the times people are like, oh yeah, that's a cause from, stress. Or it could just be your body doing that. But a lot of the times it comes from stress or immense pain, mental pain, right? Or there's that time where there's a stomach. There's a hole somewhere in your body. I think it was in your stomach area. I don't think it was either your kidney, your stomach, or whatever, but that's caused from severe stress. I know that was touched upon in a show once, so take my that with a grain of salt. I don't know how logistic that one is, but yeah. So it's that. It's also avoiding the triggers, a lot of negative thoughts, but overall, PTSD is basically your brain reminding you of what happened, being like, hey, hold up, this is something similar to the thing that happened to you. Stop. You have to avoid it. Stop. And it plagues people's minds because there is no cure. There is, pills to help. There is things to help. You could avoid your triggers, but if you haven't discovered all your triggers and you fall upon a trigger, you're gonna go into an episode. And these episodes can, be vastly different. Some people can have really vivid flashbacks. Some people can have not so vivid flashbacks, but it still is flashbacks. And these flashbacks can present differently. It could just be remembering the thing that happened and feeling so immensely horrible about it and feeling so, stressed. But not, it's a whole episode, right? Or you could be put back into that event. Your mind warps you into believing that you are back there. You're back when that happened. And it could be extremely, traumatic. You could re-traumatize yourself because of that, and you can't stop yourself from doing that. Or it could just simply be you start to avoid the thing. You just feel the emotions, right? There's different ways it could present itself, but for the most part, it's like, hey, warning. And the brain is trying to help you. Right? It's trying to prevent you from having to live through that again. But in trying to prevent you from living through that again, it's making you live through it again. Yeah, sure, it's fictionally, but you're going through it again. And it's doing this constantly. And it's a very, very horrible way to live, obviously, and there's no cure. People with post-traumatic stress disorder have their ways of coping. And it's sad. It's sad. And my heart goes to any individual with PTSD because, like any mental disorder and mental illness, it is a battle, it is a wound, and it is an illness that you cannot see, right? Unlike with, for example, cancer or or POTS, right? Anything like that, those are physical. You can see these side effects, right? With this one is a mental, right? And a lot of the times it goes physical as well, because that's funny with your mind. Like, if you go to study psychology, you would also learn basic anatomy, and the workings of the mind. I think I discussed with my mom one time that, like, basically you kind of become a med student, like not fully med student, but like you learn some of the things that med students learn. Like, there's some classes you're taking that it's like med students and then some psychology students, right? Because you need to learn about the mind. To learn about the mind and psychology, you have to learn about the body, because the mind controls it all. Of course you have to learn about the body, and it's super interesting to me. I'm going on a whole rant. Social anxiety, I don't think I need to, as I said, evaluate that one or tell you what it is. It's one of those really well-known ones. Social anxiety, you know what anxiety is. If you don't know what anxiety is, go watch Inside Out 2. That shit was the bomb. I loved how they visualized some of the stuff. Look, Inside Out and Inside Out 2, I don't watch it for the plot. No. I watch it for the way that they portray stuff in the psychology realm, that the way they put it to mind, the way they visualize it, right? The way they visualize emotions, the way they visualize memories, the way they visualize core personalities, right? Core things that make you you, right? The way they visualize imagination, the way they visualize ideas, dude, those ideas, or obviously in Inside Out 2, the way they visualize, anxiety. I love the way that they visualize anxiety as, an emotion and stuff like that. I loved the way that they visualized, what's it called? Puberty. That's literally what happens in your mind with puberty. It literally destroys everything that's happened and rebuilds it back up. That's what's happening with your chemicals in your brain and in your body, right? Everything's changing and everything's being disoriented. And I love how they didn't finish. I love how they went, okay, all right, break. Time to go, because puberty does not last, it does not happen overnight. That shit is long. You have to deal with it for a while. And there's a lot of things that I love. I love if they would, I want to see, maybe not necessarily a movie about it, right? But, maybe, I don't know, a short film of, how they would visualize stuff, maybe, for example, I was talking to my mom, right? Because we have siblings. I have siblings with ADHD and stuff. And I was like, okay, how would they visualize ADHD in the mind? How would that work? How would that visualize? And me and my mom came up with, ideas and stuff like that. She thought it would be in a whole new emotion. I'm like, it's not an emotion, because it affects everything else. Is it just, how the board came? The little console? Is that just how the console came? Is that just how it is? Is it, little ideas that come in? How is it? How is it? And I had fun. I would love to hear what you guys think on how it is and stuff like that. I'm going on a whole long rant. On to the big thing. Izuku is in danger, and I'm scared. And maybe this is why I've been ranting for long, to keep you guys occupied. And make you think everything's okay. Because everything's gonna be okay. Everything's okay. Everything's okay. Nothing's gonna go wrong. Nothing is gonna go wrong, okay? Nothing could go wrong. Nothing, absolutely nothing. I'm not crying, you're crying. As always, my raindrops, make sure to eat, sleep, drink water, take your meds, have a wonderful day or night. Link to my Discord server and socials are down in the description. Subscribe to see more of my content, and thank you so much for watching.